Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. Today I have perhaps the greatest ergogenic aid that nobody is paying attention to. If you want to improve performance, the conversation today is something you want to listen to all the way through. What is it? Breath, breathing. Now, this sounds like something you want to disregard and stop listening to, but I'm going to tell you that might be the biggest mistake you ever make if you want to improve your mind and your focus, if you want to improve your mobility, your spine, your digestion, and your sleep. It's a long list. It sounds like a bold statement, right? But I tell you it's not. It's probably the greatest difference maker that I've had in the last 12 to 18 months of my life. As soon as I started implementing strategic extended breathing or slowing down my breath, my mind changed, my performance changed, my perceived exertion to stress, my perceived exertion to training absolutely shifted and changed. And I might be the world's biggest advocate now for improving performance. So if you're trying to improve your posing in fitness, if you're trying to improve your training, if you're trying to improve your ability to digest food, your ability to sleep, as I said, every one of these things is going to be influenced by your breath. Now, today's guest, Patrick McKeown, is an expert in breathing. And I see benefits in breathing that I didn't even know existed. And he gets into all of those details. So the things that I'm used to seeing or the things that I expected from breath work were just like calming my mind and be able to be in control of my mind. But Patrick gets into at least 10 other things that you're going to see that improve from paying attention to your breath. So I won't spoil it, but I want you guys to listen all the way through to my conversation with Patrick McKeown of the Oxygen Advantage. Enjoy the show. So even from a logical perspective, my background is biomechanics, and if you look at it from that perspective, right, the most reflexive movement we do in the human body is breathing, and that's affecting everything we do. Meaning, every muscle of the upper body. If the muscles of my intercostals and that surround my rib cage are not functioning properly, every time I breathe, it's going to be influenced. I may have some rotation. I may have some limitations. I'm not going to have proper thoracic extension and inflection. All these things happen in every single movement that we do, whether literally, if it's just walking, all these muscles are incorporated. And if there's dysfunction there, I truthfully believe that that breathing is the gateway to fixing this stuff. And it's the first thing that I do when somebody comes in here and says, hey, I have poor mobility. How do I get better at this, building this body part? Or how do I get better at preventing the shoulder pain? I don't even look at their body. I just go, well, what are you doing for breathing? And the answer is always, you know what the answer is. I don't pay attention to it. So if we just introduce a deep, expansive morning breath practice so when I started, like most people, probably like yourself, it was a 6-second inhalation as a maximum inhalation, a 6-second exhalation as a maximum exhalation. So now I actually get up toward like 60 and 70-second inhalation and exhalation cycles, which is just really expansive to the lungs, allowing the diaphragm to really expand and contract. I notice a massive difference in my upper body, my mobility. I have no more pain in my spine, no more pain in my shoulders. And when I don't do it for a few weeks, it massively comes back. That's step one. And then you add in, okay, now I'm in control of my diaphragm. Now I can actually do some type of, what we call in bodybuilding vacuums, where you're getting all your air out, you're pulling your diaphragm up into your rib cage, making that waist control, which is better for digestion. It's better for peristalsis. We know that stuff. And then you start getting into the parasympathetic talk, and I don't want to lead this conversation. I want you to tell me about all these benefits that people can expect. I'm just giving you my personal experience and why I'm so excited about breathing. I'm a huge advocate of what you do.
So when we're talking about the main breathing muscle, we're talking about the diaphragm as the main breathing muscle. The nose is directly linked to the diaphragm, and breathing through the mouth is directly linked to the upper chest. Now, when breathing, of course, it's an everyday activity, every minute, every hour, every day. But how many of your athletes, they sleep with their open mouth, and during all that time, they're activating the upper chest. They may exercise with open mouth, and they also periodically breathing through the mouth throughout the day. What that's going to do is lead to poor muscle tone of the diaphragm, and functional movement is dependent on functional breathing. So if breathing isn't right, movement isn't right. So everything that you said there was absolutely spot on.
Yep.
Now, the biggest thing about breathing is that people don't realize how oxygen is actually delivered from the blood to the cells. It's not about breathing hard to get more oxygen into the blood. Light breathing, your blood is already almost fully saturated. The key is, how do you get oxygen from the blood to the cells? And you need carbon dioxide for that. If we're breathing too hard, we get rid of too much CO2, and the affinity of hemoglobin, or the red blood cells, for oxygen strengthens. One key aspect is that if we are doing expansive breathing, that we make our breathing so light that can we do expansive breathing over a long period of time, and with that make the breathing so light that you feel air hunger, because air hunger then is telling you that CO2 is increased in the blood.
Yep.
That way you'll get the benefits of the biomechanics, but you'll also get the benefits of biochemistry. Breathing is a three-pronged approach. You've got biomechanics, you've got biochemistry, and you've got psychophysiological. And when researchers are looking at this and they're asking, like, how can we determine if somebody's got good breathing patterns or not? One international publication, the International of Sports Physical Therapy last year, they looked at Untitled CO2, which is measuring biochemistry. They looked at the high-low method, which is determining, are you breathing using your upper chest, your sternocleidomastoid, the accessory muscles, or are you using your diaphragm? And they also looked at psychophysiological, which is a questionnaire called an Megan questionnaire. Now, from that, they found there's no correlation between the three of them. The best and probably easiest way to determine functional breathing patterns is breath hold time. Now, we've used Bolt score, and before that was called a control pause. And a Bolt score of less than 25 seconds, there's an 89% chance that you have dysfunctional breathing patterns. So with that, we would always say to our athletes, I have two tests when an athlete comes into me. The first thing is I observe their breath. I observe them as they walk in the door. How regular is it? What's the amplitude of breathing? I get an idea of the respiratory rate. Are there natural pauses between breaths, etc.? I measure their Bolt score. It's a very simple test. Normal breath in, normal breath out. Pinch your nose, hold your nose, and count how long it takes in seconds until you feel the first definite desire to breathe. Then let go and breathe in through your nose. And the breath at the end should be normal. If their Bolt score is less than 25 seconds, there's tremendous room for improvement. And the goal is to reach 40 seconds. And the Bolt score is a measurement of the degree of breathlessness. So because how hard you breathe during rest will also determine how hard you breathe during physical exercise. You can imagine somebody with poor breathing patterns. You know, you sit them down, their breathing is hard, and then you ask them to do physical exercise, and all of a sudden they have labored breathing.
Right.
So an athlete who has the disproportionate breathlessness, that's not always due to poor condition. Because you could have somebody who's training and, you know, they're repeatedly training, but in between that, their everyday breathing is holding them back. And this is what this is all about.
And then their level of perceived exertion will be much higher, right? You'll ask them, how hard did you work? They'll think, oh my goodness, I worked so hard, when in reality it really wasn't that hard. And that's what I'm experiencing in performance now is like, I'm doing the things that everyone else is doing and I'm ready to go. Like I finished my stuff and I'm like, all right, what's next? And everybody else is laying on the floor like they can't catch their breath. And I'm like, man, this is just, the only thing I've done differently is learn how to control my diaphragm, learn how to control my breath.
Yes, yes. And how do we build up the diaphragm? How do we get in at that muscle? So one way to do it is, okay, we address breathing pattern disorders. We use different techniques in terms of restoring diaphragm, but nose breathing is key, and nose breathing during sleep. Any of your athletes who wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, not only are they more likely to wake up tired, but they're also developing poor breathing patterns, which is going to translate into sports performance.
Patrick, I've been taping my mouth because of your advice.
Excellent.
It's a true story.
Well, you know what? That's tremendous.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, and I sleep so much better. I wake up and I feel, I think I've always been a nose breather, but, you know, at one point in my life, I was a 318-pound bodybuilder. So, you know, I was finding any way I could to breathe. But since having retired, I mean, the mouth taping has made a big difference to my quality of sleep.
And Ben, you know, just without going, while it's in my mind, you think about the guys who you're working with or the gals that you're working with. They're big, strong individuals. Their necks are very, very wide, you know. And as a result, it can infringe on airway size. So now you can have a compromised upper airway. When I was looking at NFL players, especially the big guys, they've got a very high risk of obstructive sleep apnea.
Yep.
And basically that means that they stop breathing during sleep due to collapse of the upper airways. The architecture of the upper airways is totally different when you breathe through your nose versus when you breathe through your mouth. And if I was to say two things, I would say to athletes, especially in your game, is get a high Bolt score, breathe through your nose during sleep, but don't sleep on your back. 50% of people who have obstructive sleep apnea, their apneas will double when they sleep on their back, because what happens is with gravity, the jaw falls back, but the tongue falls into the airway.
Yeah.
So how should we do it during the day? When we're going about during the day, we should have lips together, jaws relaxed, and tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, because however we breathe during the day will carry through into sleep. Now, it's coming back to it because it's all interconnected. The nose, like if you take a look down at your chest at the moment and take a breath in through the mouth, you'll see that your mouth is directly linked to the upper chest.
Yeah.
The nose is directly linked to the diaphragm. I often, you hear of people doing diaphragmatic breathing, but then they're spending most of their time with their mouth open. It's not going to work.
Right.
You cannot activate the diaphragm unless you breathe through your nose. We have weightlifters, some of them, Singapore's strongest man, and he was doing his weights with mouth taped. Now, it was very interesting. He was also doing his weights with breath holding. And his blood pressure we sent in blood pressure readings, and they went 220 over 110, which is pretty high. We had it checked out. A transient increase to blood pressure wouldn't be a problem, but it wouldn't be without risk if individuals were prone to cardiovascular events.
Right.
So we don't encourage breath holding during weights. However, we would encourage nasal breathing if possible.
Always.
Core strength is going to be influenced by good diaphragmatic function, spinal stabilization. Now, we do breath holding though without weights. So we use the exhale hold technique. What we do is we want to stress the body a little bit for the body to make adaptations. So we have individuals take a normal breath in, normal breath out, they pinch their nose, and we would have them say walk, jog, or even sprint, holding their breath. And what is happening there is that as they hold their breath, oxygen in the blood drops and carbon dioxide in the blood increases. And basically, due to a drop of oxygen, the hydrogen ion that's coming from the cells doesn't get oxidized. So it forms with pyruvic acid and it forms lactic acid. Lactic acid then dissociates into hydrogen ion and lactate ion. The second thing is the carbon dioxide in the blood, because there's an increase of it due to the breath holding, carbon dioxide dissociates into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. So we have an acid effect coming from the lack of oxygen, and we have an acid effect coming from the carbon dioxide. So we're disturbing the blood acid-base balance, and that then in turn is causing the body to make adaptations, and it's happening even inside in the muscle compartment. Buffering capacity increases. So buffering capacity is very important, that if you're really pushing yourself, that the hydrogen ion, the acid that's coming from the cell, can be neutralized so it doesn't cause fatigue. Mm-hmm. And you can change that by doing breath holding. Hard physical exercise won't necessarily do it because you don't get a disturbance as much to the blood acid base balance. But breath holding, just even simple walking to stimulate anaerobic glycolysis to get that effect will work. Now, at the same time, the respiratory center in the brain is noticing a change and a buildup of carbon dioxide, and it's repeatedly sending signals via the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm to contract, to take more air in. And as you're doing a breath holding, you'll feel the neck muscles contracting, but you'll also feel your diaphragm contracting. So you're putting an extra load onto the diaphragm muscle to strengthen it. So that will improve inspiratory muscle strength and expiratory muscle strength. So overall, in terms of getting the diaphragm going, different techniques and breath holding can be quite useful there with your group of people as well.
It's great you brought that up. So that was one of the side benefits that I've heard about, and I wonder if you could talk to it, and I guess you kind of just did, the idea of breath being one of the best ways to alkalize your body. So if you're doing these deep breathing cycles, actually producing more acid, your body's probably going to react and start changing the acid base levels. Is that something you're familiar with?
The acid base of the blood, if you look at, say, normal blood pH is 7.4 or 7.365, And the body operates within very tightly defined parameters. Now, it's through the breath, actually, that carbon dioxide, the regulation of your breathing is the primary regulator of blood pH. A secondary regulator of blood pH is the kidneys. So I think that through the breath, we excrete about 10,000 milliequivalents of acid per day. If we do a breath hold, we have a buildup of CO2 in the blood. And that's going to drop blood pH because of CO2 is acidic. Yep. But on the other hand, say if you were to hyperventilate and breathe really hard, you offload, you get rid of CO2. And that would cause respiratory alkalosis. Blood will become too alkaline. Now, the issue there is that the blood doesn't want to be too alkaline. It doesn't want to be too acidic. It wants to be normal.
Right.
If the blood is too alkaline due to hyperventilation, in the long term, what happens is that the kidneys will dump bicarbonate in order to normalize blood pH, but then your buffering capacity is reduced. And individuals who have no resilience, you know, if you see individuals who are very unwell, their breathing can be very, very poor. And it doesn't take much to push them over the edge. They're teetering on the brink of symptoms. That's a biochemical change that's taken place due to the body. The body is, wants to maintain normal blood pH. Even if you do hard physical exercise and if you breathe through it, your blood pH won't change by all that much, because as CO2 comes from the cells, ventilation increases to get rid of the extra CO2. It's a little bit different. Like, I don't know, the Wim Hof technique, you're probably familiar with it. That would be a hypocapnic hypoxic response. And basically it involves hyperventilating for, say, 2 minutes. Get rid of a lot of CO2. Blood pH increases from 7.365 up to 7.75. Now at 7.8, cells die. So this is an extreme hypocapnic response. It's a very interesting exercise as a stressor in the short term. So it's putting the body into a stress to build up immune functioning. And I think it's very useful. It's very interesting. I think it can suit many people. And especially it would improve resilience, but you will have to have a certain amount of resilience in the first place before you do it. If you have somebody with breathing pattern disorders, and if you have them hyperventilate for, say, even 30 seconds to 1 minute to 2 minutes, they'll start feeling lightheaded, they'll start feeling symptoms due to blood vessels constriction. The harder we breathe, the more our blood vessels constrict, and the harder we breathe, the tighter the bond between hemoglobin and oxygen. So it's not necessarily true that as you breathe hard during the hyperventilation that you're flooding the blood with oxygen. Yes, the amount of O2 in the blood will increase, but we have to bear in mind that during normal everyday breathing, our blood oxygen saturation is already 95 to 99%. It's already almost fully saturated. So the Wim Hof technique would be hypoxic, hypocapnic, low O2, low CO2. Ours is hypoxic, hypercapnic, low O2, high CO2. So there's similarities, and there's similarities in terms of stresses to the body. I think if you look at modern life, we're all living in a comfort zone to some degree. Yep. And the body isn't exposed to stresses that it would have been throughout our evolution. And it's good to expose the body to stress to get the body to make adaptations. Hard training will do it. Breath holding will do it. Hyperventilation will do it. But the main thing that I would say to people, if they are doing hyperventilation, it has got excellent benefits to it, but don't have a belief that it's good to be doing that all the time, because it will disrupt your biochemistry. And in the long term, it's not good. It's like any stress. You do it intermittently. You do it to provoke the body, but you don't want to be doing it continuously.
Talk to me about some of the more of the benefits that people are going to experience. So we know that potentially increasing nitric oxide production from breathing, is that a real thing? Can you tell me about that?
Yes. Yeah, the nose, nitric oxide is produced at different sites of the body. There's 3 isoforms of it. There's endothelial, there's inducible. And when we're talking about the nose and the nasal cavity, was the first discovered. Nitric oxide on the exhale breath of a human being was only discovered in 1991. So it's a relatively recent discovery. Every time we breathe through the nose, we pick up a concentration of nitric oxide, and we carry that nitric oxide into the lungs, and in the lungs it sterilizes the incoming air. But one of the main benefits of nitric oxide in the lungs is that it redistributes blood throughout the lungs. If you think of human beings, we're up right now at the moment. The greatest concentration of blood is in the lower lobes of the lungs. But if you're doing physical exercise, the athlete's more likely to be breathing through the mouth, and they're ventilating the upper part of the lungs. So there's a mismatch here. So when you breathe through your nose, you carry the air deeper into your lungs. And also when you breathe through your nose, you pick up nitric oxide. And nitric oxide redistributes the blood from the lower lobes of the lungs to the upper. So the amount of oxygen uptake by nasal breathing and harnessing nasal nitric oxide increased by between 10 and 15%. That was found back in 1988. One researcher called Swift, patients had jaw surgery, and they were forced, because their jaws were wired shut, they were forced to continuously nasal breathe. And the researchers found that their O2 increased by 10 to 15%. Now, here is the question, because I know in terms of your game, nitric oxide is a very powerful molecule in terms of
people
what
are
you're
supplementing
doing.
with this stuff, right? Like people want to take it and they want to pay for it. So if we can find a way to get 10 to 15% more just naturally, that'd be very fascinating.
Well, if you look at the concentration of nitric oxide through the nose, it's 50 to 200 parts per billion. And through the mouth, it's 10 parts per billion.
Wow.
So there's no comparison in terms of breathing through the mouth. You don't harness nasal nitric oxide. Now, as I said, nitric oxide is formed in other sites in the body. For instance, inside in the blood vessels, endothelial nitric oxide. There's neuronal nitric oxide. There's inducible nitric oxide. Inducible nitric oxide will come from inflammation. Now, researchers still not totally sure. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? There's still debate about it. Now, I can't give you an absolute definite that the nitric oxide that comes from the nose is lasting for long enough to get into circulation. Some researchers say it'll only last for 5 seconds, but others are saying it lasts for up to 30 seconds. And until researchers realize, that it is the length of time it lasts, because if you think it takes about 2 seconds to take a breath into the lungs. So it takes 2 seconds to bring nitric oxide into your lungs. And it takes about 3/4 of a second as the time of exposure between the lungs and the blood. So there's 3 seconds. So now you've only 2 seconds left. So I can't say that for sure, but I will say something. We've seen men with erectile dysfunction and, over 40 years of age. And we have to consider this. Nitric oxide, the drug Viagra is based primarily on nitric oxide. Mm-hmm. We've seen men, as soon as they switch to nasal breathing, that erectile dysfunction changed, and they were waking up with erections first time in the morning, and they would say it to me because, of course, I'm a man. So, there's something in this that we don't fully know what's happening, and researchers haven't caught up with it. But any man who has erectile dysfunction, they'd want to start breathing through their nose at night, because otherwise, that's not gonna solve itself.
Hey everybody, I interrupt this podcast to tell you a little bit about optimizing digestion. The idea is you are not what you eat. You are what you absorb. So as I lead this conversation behind optimizing your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to allow your body to rest and digest, which means we need to break down the food we eat. So eating in a rush, eating when we're in a stressed state has been shown to decrease digestion and potentially contribute to things like leaky gut and increased digestive inflammation. That's a big issue. So if you're not already taking some time to breathe, as Patrick says, before you eat, I highly suggest that you do so. The next step in optimizing digestion is adding something into your digestive tract to optimize breakdown of food. So as people who are typically fitness-oriented or muscle-building oriented, we are eating a lot of protein. If you're eating anything over 100 grams of protein a day, your digestive tract is going to be taxed at some level. Our bodies are not meant to digest hundreds of grams of protein, especially on a repetitive basis. Maybe we can eat a large amount in one bolus, in one sitting, but on a repetitive basis, time and time again, our digestive tract is taxed. And I highly recommend that you guys use digestive enzymes, particularly proteolytic digestive enzymes, and also, adding in things that digest fat and carbohydrates is useful as well. But protein is the thing that's going to be hardest to digest and hardest in your digestive tract. And it's something that I've been doing for years that massively decreased it. Bloating, massively improved my digestion, and allowed me to really assimilate the protein I'm eating, because you are not what you eat, you are what you absorb. And I found a massive increase in my recovery rate when I started adding in proteolytic enzymes. And I've been using these things for probably the better part of 15 years. And I don't use them all the time, but certainly in periods of necessity of increased recovery, and certainly in periods of increased calorie intake. If you're trying to really grow in, say, an off season, or if you're trying to optimize your digestion in pre-contest time, or just when you're getting leaner, you really want to make sure you're taking something to support digestion. And that starts with proteolytic enzymes. So if you guys have not already tried out Buy Optimizers, it's the product I use, and I recommend Masszymes. And if you want to check out masszymes.com/muscle intelligence, you can use the code MuscleBen18 for 15% off your entire order at checkout, which is awesome. And it's truthfully an amazing product. You guys are going to love it. If you want to click over to that and check out the video they've got at the top of that page, it's absolutely incredible what this stuff does, and you're going to love it once you see it. So I highly suggest you check out masszymes.com/muscle intelligence, and we will link to that in the show notes as well. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. So talk to me about mouth taping at night, because people are probably having some weird S&M visions of me taping with like duct tape or something. Talk to me about exactly how people are doing it. And, is it just the type of thing like throw some tape over your mouth? I know there's some companies out there that make some particular things made for that, which is what I've used. But yeah. Is there a particular method you recommend? And is there a duration?
For 20 years, we were using simple tape that we'd buy from a chemist, or we'd buy it on Amazon. We were using 3M micropore tape. And it's really interesting now that companies are starting to produce taping specifically for the mouth.
Have you not produced it? Are you not affiliated with the company?
No, I'm not. No, but I know them. Yeah. It's. I know lip seal tape because I've trained. Dr. Frank Seaman is it. Yeah. Now he came across it himself because his patients had poor dental health. They were bruxing at night, and bruxing is grinding of teeth. It's usually related to a sleep problem. Yep. So the individual is grinding to try and get their jaws forward, or they're trying to move their jaws forward to open up the airway. So he was saying that, like, my patients would come back after a few months and their teeth would be damaged again. He said, "What's going on here?" And he started getting them to tape their mouths closed.
And that made a difference for grinding as well?
Anyway. It makes a difference to grinding. Oh, wow. Any sleep-related problem. If you have somebody, it's been tested once. There has been one study in Taiwan. They looked at mouth taping and they found that it dropped what's called the AHI index, the apnea hypopnea index in sleep apnea, by 33%. But that's just by taping them out. Now, the other thing is, I work a lot with sleep disorders. If you change breathing so that it's lighter, if the individual is breathing hard during sleep, they're creating a lot of turbulence in the upper airways. It's contributing to snoring. It's contributing to inflammation of the upper airways. There's trauma to the throat, waking up with a dry throat, the mouth is dry, etc. None of that should be happening, and that's where taping is coming in. The tape I'm using now is lip seal tape. It's very simple. It's kind of a cottony tape that you just put over, like a fabric that you put over your lips at night. And I've been taping for 20 years. Now, you could say, well, why hasn't it changed? I suppose it's a little bit like a crutch. You're doing something for a long enough time that you continue doing it.
So I wondered, I was going to ask you, is this something you need to do perpetually, or can I just do it? Like, I figured if I did it for a couple of weeks, it would probably become a habit and I could stop. And I do it kind of intermittently. So I'll do it for 2-3 days in a row, and then I'll stop. And I find that it still has a lasting effect. Do you recommend doing it every day?
Well, see, Ben, it'll depend on the individual. I was a chronic mouth breather as a child. I had rhinitis, I had asthma. So the muscle tones, the development of the muscles and my airways is not good. Now, that's why I continued with it. And I continued with it because I was waking up for the first time feeling refreshed. Yep. And I had 20 years waking up feeling lethargic. And you're going into school, you're going into university, you're trying to concentrate. And these kids, we know 50% of children are mouth breathing, and many of your listeners will have kids. Yep. Their kids, if they're mouth breathing, they have 10 times the risk of learning difficulties in school.
I tape my kids' mouth at night, to be honest.
Well, I do too.
I sound like a bad parent, but I do. They ask for it, so I do.
Yeah, no, it's really important. Craniofacial growth of the child is influenced by whether the mouth is open or closed. And lots of researchers on this. We could talk about this, any one of these topics for hours.
Yep.
There was a functional orthodontist in the 1970s, and he brought functional orthodontistry to the United States. He did research with monkeys that was published in 1981 in the American Journal of Orthodontics. He surgically blocked the noses of the monkeys with silicone nose plugs, and all of the mouth-breathing monkeys developed narrow facial structures and crooked teeth.
Wow.
Now, you look at an athlete, a strong male, for example. They've strong jaws, they've got good airways, and they were not mouth breathers, because you can't exhibit those qualities. That's normal facial growth. You don't reach your full potential if you're going around with your mouth open as a kid, because whatever happens, and even pulmonary strength, mouth breathers, they tend to have forward head posture. They're more using the upper chest muscles.
Gosh,
and
so true.
whatever happens, that it tends to stay for the rest of their lives. So we're looking at, like, I work from a health point of view, working with people with asthma. I work with people with obstructive sleep apnea, people with anxiety. People often say, well, your breathing changes due to stress. That's correct. When we get stressed, our breathing gets faster. It's more noticeable. It's more upper chest. We sigh more. But how about people who breathe like that all the time? That's feeding into the mechanism of stress, because there is an emotion response from the diaphragm. And it is correct when people say take a deep breath, but the understanding of it is not correct. A deep breath basically means just use your diaphragm. Breathe lightly through the nose, use your diaphragm. There's a signaling mechanism that's coming from the diaphragm to the emotions. If we're stressed, we chest breathe, but if we chest breathe, we're stressed. So in terms of recovery and activating the parasympathetic response, diaphragmatic breathing there is very, very important. But also, and you might have found it yourself, Ben, when you're doing physical exercise, that your recovery is so much better when you maintain nasal breathing as much as you can throughout it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Way, way better. Now, so this may be out of the scope of the conversation, but if I'm trying to teach my children diaphragmatic breathing, do you have any recommendations? Because a couple of my kids get it, and one of them in particular, he's not getting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It takes a while for a child to switch from diaphragmatic breathing to chest breathing. All children are generally diaphragmatic breathers. However, if they're mouth breathing for, say, 6 months, they'll still probably maintain diaphragmatic breathing. If they are mouth breathing for a couple of years, that's when it starts to change to chest breathing. Mm-hmm. Children respond tremendously quickly to breathing exercises. We get them breathing through the nose. The best thing that was a game changer for me with working with kids were I started getting the children, anytime that they're distracted, is to wear tape across their lips during the day. So say, for instance, if they're on an iPhone, television, doing homework, is get them to wear the tape, because we're talking about neuroplasticity. And basically neuroplasticity is that the brain, you're trying to change the brain, and it takes 60 to 70 days for the brain, new neural pathways to connect, that the nose is associated with breathing. So we would have kids coming in, they would have been referred by, say, dentists, because if the dentist is working with the child, and if the dentist is straightening teeth, if the child continues mouth breathing, the teeth are going to relapse. There's a very high chance, because the stability of the top jaw is maintained by the tongue and the roof of the mouth. So the tongue is scaffolding for the jaw, the top jaw. And the tongue is U-shaped, and basically the top jaw forms around the shape of the tongue. Whereas mouth breathers, they need to bring the air in through the mouth, so they can't have the tongue in the roof of the mouth, so they drop their tongue. And we were finding that some kids would come in, no matter what we were doing in terms of exercises, they'd still come in mouth breathing. Wearing the tape was a huge game changer there, just making that connection. Now, the other thing is, you can show a child how to decongest their nose very simply, and an adult for that matter as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear this.
I'll give you the exercise. All it takes is you take a normal breath in through your nose, a normal breath out through your nose, and you pinch your nose. And you start walking around holding your breath. And keep walking in any direction, and keep walking until you experience a fairly strong need to breathe. Then let go, breathe in through your nose, calm your breathing. Wait a minute, do it again. In 5 repetitions, the nose will be opened up.
Do you know what's the mechanism? Is it nitric oxide?
Nobody knows. It could be nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a natural anti-inflammatory. And as you hold your breath, there's a huge buildup of nitric oxide inside the nasal cavity. Now, another aspect could be carbon dioxide. There's some papers now showing that mast cells degranulation due to carbon dioxide. So mast cells would be responsible for releasing for a chemical called histamine. That's why people take antihistamines. And again, you're talking about athletes. Athletes with hay fever, they're twice as likely to have sleep problems. So when we're talking about a stuffy nose, we're also talking about poor sleep. We're talking about poor breathing, because a stuffy nose is going to cause mouth breathing, and mouth breathing then is going to change the biomechanics of breathing. So it could be carbon dioxide, it could be nitric oxide, it could be activation of the sympathetic response. So there could be a number of different influences there, but we know it works. So I'd say to your listeners, try it.
It sounds like the ultimate advantage, especially for children. Like if anyone's out there as kids, it almost seems silly to not. Like if it's going to influence their I would attest to the fact that it's going to influence their posture. Like shallow breathing up into your chest, you're going to have a slouched shoulder. You're going to have a forward head posture. Yes. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate advantage. And even for, the parasympathetic benefit of that calm nasal breathing into the diaphragm, which we didn't get into, which I'd like to get into, but in a second. So we also brought up sleep apnea. So
yes,
I've got, I live in the bodybuilding world, and a large percentage of people have sleep apnea or bad snoring problems. And if I were to say, hey, man, tape your breath at night, they'd think I'm out of my mind and I'm trying to kill them. Is this something that's reasonable for someone with sleep apnea, or does it have to start during the day? Like, does it have to start with the nasal breathing during the day before they can go into mouth taping at night?
Dr. Christian Guilleminault, he's a Stanford medical doctor, and in about 2 weeks we go to Rome, and he'll be speaking there, and I'll be speaking there. And a few months ago we spoke in Paris. World experts came together talking about mouth breathing and sleep, and this is getting now a lot of attention. He, and I'll quote him, he said, the only valid and complete correction of pediatric sleep disorder breathing is breathing both through the nose during wakefulness and during sleep. So for a child or for an adult, it's important to breathe through your nose during the day, because how you breathe through the day is going to carry into your sleep. If you had, say, anybody coming into me, a bodybuilder, and they're prone to obstructive sleep apnea, the first thing that I would do is look to change their breathing. And the reason being is because the gold standard for the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea is called a CPAP machine. Yep. It's a device that people wear during their sleep, and it exerts a pressure, so it forces air at a pressure to splint open the airways. But there are a couple of issues with it. One is that it puts a lot of pressure on the face. Two, it's uncomfortable. So,
three, it's a machine on your face. It's not good for your love life. I guess neither is tape.
For sure, absolutely. And the other thing is, it's not addressing the crux of the issue.
Right.
If anybody with nasal obstruction is more likely to have sleep problems. So the first thing I do is start showing them how to open up your nose. And even a simple way to do that is you could do it sitting down. Take a normal breath in through your nose, normal breath out through your nose, pinch your nose, and just nod your head up and down as you hold your breath. And keep doing it until you build up a good air hunger. Then let go, breathe in through your nose. The more then you breathe through your nose, the more your nose opens up for you. If you can get your nose opening up, you're harnessing nitric oxide. Harnessing nitric oxide is a signaling molecule, and it sends a message to the upper airway dilator muscles to stay open during sleep. If you think of it now, we're awake. These muscles are working effectively. We don't have collapse of the upper airways now at this moment. But during sleep, these muscles get lazy. And it's nitric oxide that's the signaling molecule to these muscles.
Sure.
But also, the other one is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is directly linked to the upper airway dilator muscles. So to get those muscles working, we also need to use the diaphragm. But in order to use the diaphragm, we need to use the nose. Mm-hmm. Now, the second thing is I change breathing patterns. And what people could try is, how about breathing less for 3 minutes? And what it involves is that you have individuals, say, put one hand on the chest, one hand just above their diaphragm. So they're just above their navel, so they have their hand against their diaphragm. And you have them gently slow down and soften the breath for about 3 minutes to increase nitric oxide, because nitric oxide is continuously released into the nasal cavity. So if you could really slow down your breathing, you're taking a higher concentration of nasal nitric oxide into your lungs. Now, at the same time as slowing down the breath, carbon dioxide increases in the blood. As carbon dioxide increases in the blood vessels dilate. So people with cold hands, cold feet, when you start slowing down their breath, they start to feel warmer. We have 100,000 miles of blood vessels in the human body, and we can influence that through our breathing. Now, what's more, if you repeatedly practice softening the breath during the day, you develop light breathing all the time, and your breathlessness during physical exercise also reduces, but your blood circulation improves. Now, when people then go to sleep, their breathing is lighter. There's less turbulence in the airways. So it's not just like doctors will often consider the size of the airway. It's important, but let's also consider flow. If you have an individual who's breathing hard, they're generating a negative suction pressure inside the airway, and that's going to contribute to collapse. So I've seen people with mild obstructive sleep apnea, moderate and severe, even with an AHI of 65 per hour, and I've seen them make significant improvements by just changing their breathing, adopting nasal breathing.
And just slowing down the breath in itself is going to be, like we talked about briefly, a parasympathetic stimulus, which is going to decrease muscle tone, which is going to allow you to relax. You know, I noticed that just from meditation alone and deep breathing alone, all of my muscle tone is so much better. I feel like I have more mobility, more stability. I don't feel tight all the time. So if I can decrease my rate of breathing, I get the parasympathetic stimulus. Maybe that's affecting the muscles of the throat and neck, right? Decreasing their tone. Just allowing them to move, you know, even allowing the diaphragm to expand more, the ribcage to expand more. That seems so important, right? Yet we just kind of forget about it because we live in such a sympathetically dominant society. Everyone's just high-strung and always tight, right? Always tense. I mean, that benefit alone on top of the nitric oxide, it just seems like, you know, there's this stacking the benefits. No, there's no question in terms of using the diaphragm and the upper airway dilator muscles. If you want these muscles to keep your airway open during sleep, you have to breathe through your nose and you have to use your diaphragm. When we have, say, students breathe light, we always ask them, have you experienced an increased watery saliva in the mouth? And yogi have known this for years. You know, that the activation of the parasympathetic response, you will have increased watery saliva in the mouth. Whereas when we get stressed, our mouth gets dry. Now, there's a huge relationship between insomnia and obstructive sleep apnea. So individuals who are waking up tired in the morning, is it due to insomnia? Because as you say, they cannot switch off. One way, and probably what people are doing is doing the wrong thing. They're switching off by looking into a mobile phone for the last 20 minutes or hour, whatever, before sleep. And that's not going to work because, of course, there's a blue light coming from it. And also, it's a stimulus. If you practice slowing down and softening your breathing for 20 minutes before sleep, you activate the parasympathetic response, you will sleep deeper, and you wake up more alert. Incredible. Now, so when you say breathing light, is that just the same as breathing slow?
Yes, it's breathing slow, but the aim is to get air hunger. So basically, you're focusing on the airflow as it comes into your nose, and you're focusing as the airflow as it leaves the nose, and you're deliberately slowing down both the speed of the breath but also the amount of air that you're taking into the lungs. It's a very delicate exercise because if you do it too much, the air hunger gets a little bit too strong, so you have to take a break. And if you're not doing it enough, you have to slow down your breathing a little bit more. But it's a tremendous exercise at changing functional breathing patterns because we want light breathing. If you think of best athletes, if they work really hard, their breathing is relatively light for their work rate.
Right. Or it might be high and then comes back down really, really fast.
Quick.
Right.
Or if you have another individual and they're doing that same amount of physical work and their breathing is labored, well, the problem is their breathing every day is labored. Their everyday breathing is labored. How they breathe every minute, every hour, every day is labored. That's what I want to change. So if an athlete comes into me, I want to change their breathing as they're sitting on a couch. And by changing their breathing as they sit on the couch, we can translate into improved fitness when they do physical exercise. Because the same stimulus is involved. The primary stimulus to breathe is carbon dioxide, not oxygen. We have such a high reserve of oxygen in the human body, such that our oxygen levels must drop by 50% before it stimulates our breathing. So basically with carbon dioxide, the body is so sensitive to it that if there's a 2 to 5 millimeter increase of CO2 in the blood, ventilation doubles. So what we want to do is we want to deliberately slow down breathing to increase the CO2 in the blood, to expose the respiratory center to a higher amount of CO2, so that this reduces what's called a ventilatory response to carbon dioxide. Now, I don't want to go too complex, but it's like this.
No, that's great.
When you do hard physical exercise, you generate more CO2.
Mm-hmm.
As CO2 increases coming from the cells into the blood, if your breathing center in the brain is reacting strongly to the buildup of CO2, your breathing is going to be excessive. So what we're doing during rest is we're deliberately exposing the individual to a higher CO2 to reset the breathing patterns inside in the brain. And in turn, then the BOLT score, which is our measurement of progress, that will increase, and that translates into reduced breathlessness then during physical exercise.
What type of frequency do you recommend to actually see a quick response? Because I can imagine that 50% of the listeners right now are going, man, I can't do that. That's going to take me too long. I can't hold my breath for 10 seconds. I'm a mess. You're saying to do 3 minutes of slow breathing. Is that the solution? Is it once a day? Is it 5 times a day? What do you have a recommended protocol?
It does take a little bit. But you know what? I think try and get people to be aware of it. We've brought out products to belts, etc., just to give you an idea. Like, there's always compliance. So basically, here we have a belt, and this belt is specifically designed, it's stretchable. We put it around the diaphragm. We have individuals actually wear it while they're on a computer, while they're at rest, while they can be sleeping. And what that's doing is adding in a resistance to breathing, to change breathing patterns. If I had somebody coming into me unwell, I would have to get them to to practice breathing exercise for up to 1 hour per day. Now that sounds a lot, but how about your guy who's doing his physical exercise? Switch to nasal breathing.
Absolutely.
When he's driving his car or watching TV, to slow down his breath. And you were talking about meditation. Most people with anxiety will not meditate, and the reason being is because their mind is too active and they can't focus on the breath.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they can't even slow down their breath. They start getting more anxious when they try to slow down their breath. That's just the reality. Like, this is what I'm trying to figure out a way to overcome. Right? Is like, first when I tell somebody to meditate, I don't even tell them to pay attention to the breath. I just tell them to sit there and like not extend your breath, just breathe, just relax. Because most people, like, when you try to slow down their breath, they get that feeling of like, I need to gasp, and that creates anxiety, and then they freak out and they stop. So retention is a big issue, right? We have so many people who just refuse. Like, I can't meditate. My thought is always, I can't, therefore I must. I have to, or I should be the number one candidate. But I don't.
No, totally. But you can come at it from a different angle. There's small little breath hold exercises that individuals can do that we're bypassing that, and even small breath hold exercises that you can change them. Like, for example, if I was to look at the worst individual in terms of like panic attacks in the extreme, these people have an aversion to air hunger, and they've got a very, very strong sensitivity to a buildup of carbon dioxide. Now what we do is we deliberately give them a teaspoon of carbon dioxide. Give them a teaspoon over and over and over and over to condition their body to be able to tolerate a buildup of CO2. Then they can tolerate air hunger, because it's the air hunger that's actually feeding into the mechanism. Like with asthma, with anxiety, with panic attacks, there's a feedback mechanism there. The condition is changing breathing patterns. Poor breathing is feeding back into it. And we want to try and break that cycle. And the other thing is that when you deliberately slow down your breath to create air hunger, your mind will be more anchored to the breath and less likely to wander. And let's look at attention span. In 2002, Microsoft, the company, the computer company, they surveyed 3,000 Canadians, and they found that their average attention span was 12 seconds. They repeated the same study in 2012. And they found that attention span has dropped to 8 seconds. There has been a 25% drop of attention span in 10 years. And they put it down to information technology. We're constantly distracted by emails, by text messaging. Everything is commanding our attention. Now, what's the problem with this? Attention is your ability to hold your attention, or your ability to focus on something for a period of time without distraction.
Productivity, right?
it's productivity, it's concentration, it's happiness. In terms of if the mind is very active, our stress levels increase. So as concentration and attention span decreases, anxiety and mental health issues increase. And this is social media is going to be contributing to this in a big way.
Yep.
If I was to say something, I would like big companies such as Facebook to be contributing to mental health funds, because I think our next generation, we have to watch these kids who are spending so much time on mobile devices, because all it's doing, it's really going to play with their brain. Now, here's where the breath comes in. Because you're focusing on breathing, you're training the brain to be concentrated. And it's helping, to counteract some of the pressures that our modern lifestyle is doing.
So true. Like I said, I'm trying to start with my children, and I notice if I do it for 3 or 4 days in a row, they respond so well and so quickly. But when you don't do it for 3 or 4 days in a row, good luck getting their attention, right? They're like little squirrels trying to run around, trying to catch those things. Children are, I think they're more plastic, they're more pliable than adults, which is great. But at the same time,
yes,
trying to get their attention for 5 seconds can always be a challenge. So maybe the same as adults. I guess I don't try with as many adults. But Patrick, what else do you think? Is there one other thing that you think people need to know that we haven't talked about, that we can really cover really quickly, that's absolutely essential to people's success in understanding breathing, the benefits of breathing, and the oxygen advantage? Really, I think, Ben, we need to be aware of our breath. It's most people are not aware of their breathing. It's something that just happens there. It's one of the most beautiful things is to connect with your breath, is to get out of your mind. Don't live in your head. Connect with the breath. Follow your breathing. Understand the physiology of breathing. There's so many different things that you can be doing. Yeah.
You were talking about superventilation earlier on, breathing hard for, say, 30 seconds to really work the breathing muscles to expand the lungs. You can do that. You can also do breath hold exercises to really disturb the blood acid base balance to stress the body. You can also use those exercises to open up your nose and open up your lungs. We have 19 clinical trials with asthma. 2 clinical trials I was a co-author with that were published in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. These kids, their asthma improved, their sleep improved, their absenteeism reduced. When you have any athlete who's coming into you, or any of your listeners, if they have asthma, they'll also tend to have poor sleep. Asthmatics are tired all the time. So if our breathing is off, we don't get away with it. Even as you were saying, the biomechanics, spinal stabilization, core strength is also influenced by your breathing. So, really, what is it coming like? We as human beings, we function with food, water, and air. We can live without food for weeks. We can live without water for a few days, and we can live without air for just a few minutes. But how much air should we breathe? And breathing is subject to change. So I would say to people is, observe how you breathe. Do you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning? If so, start changing it. Is your breathing regular? Is it effortful? Is it effortless? Do you feel a hunger for air during the day at different points? If there's anything, if your breathing isn't up to par, you can change it. And what's more, breathing is that response. It's under our voluntary control that by changing our breathing, we can also target and influence the autonomic nervous system. Yeah. So we can get to those parts of the body that we wouldn't otherwise be able to influence, but we can influence them through the breath.
Do you personally just execute first thing in the morning as soon as you wake up to make it part of that morning ritual, or what is the best time for you, or what time do you recommend to your followers?
I want my followers to do it. Well, I don't use the word followers, but right. As students say, to do it throughout the day. I want them to pay attention to it. For a few years in 2000, when I came across this first back in 1998, just for personal health reasons. And I really worked hard on it, watching my breath, and I probably did it too much, But it's now how do I do it now is I'm always paying attention to my breathing at different points throughout the day. It's not so important the length of time that you spend at one sitting. It's more important is how observant are you of your breathing throughout the day. And also, make it fun. If you're doing some warm-ups, if you think about it, we're always told warm up for physical exercise. What's the purpose of a warm-up? I'll give you an explanation. There's what's called the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. It's a sigmoid curve. And basically, it's talking about, or it's describing the release of oxygen from the red blood cells. When there's an increase to body temperature, the curve shifts to the right and the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen reduces. In other words, cells receive more oxygen when body temperature increases. If you have an athlete that does a good warm-up, their body temperature increases. As their body temperature increases, now their cells are getting more oxygen. But also, another factor that causes that is CO2, called the Bohr effect. As CO2 increases, blood pH drops, and the affinity of hemoglobin and oxygen reduces. If you do a warm-up, do it with breath holding. You'll get the double effect, and you're ensuring that your muscles are getting adequate oxygenation. So now with plenty of oxygen getting to the muscles, you'll be able to push yourself harder and faster. But what's more important, if you do your warm-up with breath holding, you help open up your nose, but you also open up the lungs, because the nose and the lungs are intrinsically linked. It's a unified airway. Whatever happens in the nose will happen in the lungs, and whatever happens in the lungs will take place in the nose, and we can influence that. So you can open up your blood vessels, you can change your breathing, you can open up your airways by simply changing your breath. I would say to people, play with it, experiment with it. You know, sometimes people say to me, well, my yoga teacher tells me to do this, that, and the other. I say, listen, do this for 2 weeks. Slow down your breathing, soften your breath, increase your Bolt score, breathe through your nose, see what happens.
The problem is if you don't tell people exactly how to do it, they don't do it at all. That's why, you know, that's my belief. Is like, if you don't give them specific times of the day, like you must do it here, set your clock, they just forget, because we have, like you say, we're distracted, right? We have so many things to do.
Yes.
So that's why I'm always looking for kind of like a direct protocol. So I love the 3-minute idea. I love the, you know, personally when I implement it is every time I'm podcasting, I'm doing some type of breath hold or some type of deep breathing. I also do it for about 5 minutes before I eat. So what I'll do is I'll typically drink about 1 liter of water before every meal. And then I take that, I usually try to give about 15 minutes before I eat. So I'll take that 15 minutes in there and I'll do some type of deep breathing, slowed breathing, breath holds, something to just get my body into a more parasympathetic state to improve digestion, but also improve this oxygen delivery. So, you know, digestion's a big thing in the fitness industry. We're so focused on consumption, like how much can I get in, or you know, getting in good quality foods. We're not focused on absorption. So, taking that 10 minutes before you eat. You know, we're all eating multiple times a day. Taking 5 to 10 minutes before you eat to breathe, I think, is probably one of the greatest practices I've started to implement in my life over the last 12 months. That's improved my digestion, improved my satiety. I don't feel like I need to eat as much, and my focus and brain control is through the roof. So,
yes.
Patrick, thank you so much for your time. You know, absolutely fantastic. Where can people find out more from you?
Our website is oxygenadvantage.com, and I have a book now. It's in 14 languages, so it's just going into Taiwan and Chinese, German, French, Italian, Dutch. So it's going throughout the world. So I think it's tremendous. You know, I've been working with the breath for health for about 15 years, and more recently, the last 5-6 years now in sports, and we're seeing tremendous inroads. So it's great.
Yeah, and as people can hear in my voice, if they're not already executing this stuff, they should head over to your website and definitely pick up your book. We've pulled a lot of cool stuff off your website that I'll link to in the show notes, so everybody can check out Patrick McKeown and the Oxygen Advantage. Thank you very much for your time, sir. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.